The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. You're listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. I'm JC Rader.
And I'm Julianne Schroeder.
And we're therapists bringing you honest conversations around emotional wellness and self-development.
Inspired by our personal experiences in therapy and because of our clients, we realize therapy has so much to offer both on and off the couch. Listen for tips and tools to navigate all the challenges that life throws your way.
To give us feedback on topics and guests, or for more information on our community events, counseling, or online services, contact us at everydaytherapypodcast.com. Hello, and let's talk about White Rock Counseling first. So that's where me and Julianne practice counseling and also yoga therapy. So you can find us at whiterockcounseling.com. I specialize in anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, boundaries, relationships, transitions in life, and Julianne has a whole host of other specialties.
Some similarities: anxiety, burnout, those with a really harsh inner critic, perhaps that's showing up in perfectionism, codependency, we're
all
here
of
for
the
you.
fun things so find us at whiterockcounseling.com, and let's jump into meeting our guest today.
Yes.
So Brad Imhoff, I met you at the American Counseling Association conference. Mm-hmm. That is a mouthful. And you spoke on social anxiety, and I immediately went up to him after I heard him speak, and I was like, can you be on our podcast? And he flew in from Ohio to Dallas to be on our podcast.
This is a new level of honor.
Yes,
wow.
Seriously.
People are flying in. Wow.
Yeah. Really cool.
Also convenient that your wife can go to Waco and Magnolia Farms.
Meet some friends.
We'll say it's because we're a big
exactly.
deal.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. So Brad, you teach at Liberty University.
Yes, in their online program.
Yes. Yeah. So we're just so honored to have you here today. And kind of just want to jump into the topic. I struggled with social anxiety for a long time and didn't even realize it. And I know you have personal experience with it as well. So I don't know, can you just share a little bit about what social anxiety is and why it's so hard to distinguish? Is this social anxiety, regular anxiety?
Yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in that. So social anxiety in and of itself is kind of, it's an anxiety that is based around fear of judgment and evaluation from other people. So there's that apprehension in social interactions. And then another significant part of it, though, is kind of anxiety about exhibiting symptoms of anxiety. So, blushing and sweaty hands, clammy hands, things like that, stuttering, mumbling, stuff like that, where people see the person as anxious. That is all kind of tied into the disorder as well, that there's an anxiety about being anxious and displaying that anxiety. So it's kind of a vicious cycle of sorts.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. It sounds horrible. And I've experienced it. It is not fun.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times there's I think of social anxiety, or I did at one point, of being scared of people, or kind of a recluse or hermit, but it's not you're scared of people. I like how you describe it as there's fear of judgment.
Yeah. It's that kind of evaluation piece, that scrutiny that oftentimes isn't even there. Sure, people make judgments and stuff, but I think with social anxiety, it's a perception that a person will be judged far more critically or harshly than they actually will be. But when you have that in mind, it makes it difficult to interact with those people that you're fearing that judgment from.
Yeah, I may totally botch this, Brad, and maybe you can help me out. But I learned this in social psychology, and there was like an experiment where this person wore this hideous shirt with like a big face on it. Are you familiar with that experiment?
It's not ringing a bell right now.
Okay. And so they were supposed to walk into a room with a lot of people, and people write down, like different things that they remember from the experience, the other participants in the research. And rarely, very few of them remembered the big shirt, which is exactly what you're saying. Like, we think that this, shirt with a big head on it, or whatever you're fearful of evaluation of, is really loud and big, but it's not necessarily always the case.
Yeah. In the literature, they talk about kind of a perceived audience, and so in some social situations, you have a real audience. I do presentations, ironically enough, in front of sometimes hundreds of people, and so there is a real audience there, and they do have some standard for quality. But the idea in social anxiety is that there's this perceived audience that even when there isn't someone actually watching me, there's still that sense that someone is. Like it's kind of like the teenage kind of the egocentric, idea that people are always looking at me, side of sort of thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But in a more negative way, and so. It's kind of in the literature spelled out that there's this perceived audience. They have a standard for approval, essentially, and that standard is pretty high. And folks with social anxiety just have this perception that I'm unable to meet that standard. So there's some sense of inadequacy there. But it's interesting that you described that, where what we think would stand out most doesn't.
Right.
And so even our real kind of flubs socially, when we do mess up, we hang on to them for far longer than anybody else who was there does. So,
Yeah. So it sounds like this idea that we can all acknowledge we have our own inner critics, and
Absolutely.
right, they're the most difficult part. But for those that struggle with social anxiety, perhaps that's more elevated.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we know that there's so many complex factors, and everybody's different. But what would you say contributes to social anxiety?
Yeah. In the cognitive behavioral literature, it kind of goes back to some of the core beliefs people develop at an early age. So whether it's being bullied early on or having poor social experiences that we kind of hang on to, we kind of develop these core beliefs at an early age that often take form kind of in a very factual statement. Like I mentioned, I am inadequate, for example. And so as we move through life, kind of in terms of selective attention and the confirmation bias, we pay attention to those scenarios that confirm that core belief. So if I believe I'm inadequate, anything that even might remotely suggest that, whether it is, poor social interaction, whether it's a test I didn't do well on, or whatever it might be, I take that to heart. I think about that. I ruminate on it for far too long. But anything that goes well and kind of contradicts that core belief tends to just kind of fly by the radar. I describe in presentations kind of as a filter. So those things that confirm that negative core belief, we take to heart. Those things that disprove it kind of get caught on that filter, and we don't pay any attention to them.
Or discount it, that really
Exactly.
wasn't the case. That was my luck, that I did okay, or that they liked me.
You get a compliment, it's, well, they just felt bad for me, or they're nice to everybody, that sort of thing, and just brush that off. So you can imagine moving through life, how it just kind of continually reinforces itself when you're only paying attention to those situations that we oftentimes distort even to fit that idea. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. What are some other, you mentioned, I am inadequate. What are some other core beliefs that people might have in this realm?
Yeah. I'm inadequate. I'm incompetent. I kind of distinguish those two as inadequate is kind of, I believe I can do things, but I can never meet that standard. I can do it, but it's never good enough. Whereas incompetent is more of a just, I'm incapable completely, that sort of thing. There's, I'm worthless, I'm unlovable. Very specifically, I'm socially inept, if targeted down really specifically to just social life. Just those those shortcomings that we turn into absolute statements, that black and white, here's how it is kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, probably too. I'm wondering how much like parenting styles and what is noticed about a child and how much like that contributes. For example, one thing that I'm very sensitive about in working with some clients of mine is not using the word shy. Of saying, oh, you may be more reserved, more observant. But if you had a parent that said, oh, you're so too shy, too quiet, I could see how they would then latch on to that sort of belief and that perpetuate the social anxiety.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I've got a 4-year-old son, and we were in the elevator today at the hotel, and a lady in the elevator said something to him. He had a dinosaur shirt on. She said, oh, I have a grandson who loves dinosaurs, that sort of thing. And he just kind of tucked in behind my wife and didn't really respond. And my initial reaction is, oh, are you going to be shy, that kind of thing. And immediately it kind of pops into my mind that I don't want him to latch on to this idea that, well, that's how I am. And I love the idea of kind of reframing it as observant or kind of even slow to warm up kind of thing, as opposed to here's how you are.
Yeah, cautious, right? Because there's a level of stranger danger that we would want our kids to have, right?
Right.
Like, who are you talking to me? Right.
Yeah.
Brad, could you share a little bit about your personal experience with social anxiety?
Yeah.
What did that look like for you?
It, in hindsight, I can see it kind of at play throughout my life, very early on. And I think it's even mentioned in the DSM. I know it's in some of the other literature that people go 15 years on average with social anxiety before getting any treatment for it. So
I did not realize that.
Yeah.
Is it because it's like harder to identify, or?
I think there's a couple reasons. I think one is that counseling is kind of an intimate social interaction. And so,
that makes sense.
You think about the things that counselors observe in other people that the general population doesn't. We do tend to scrutinize, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but we see things that perhaps other people aren't aware of. So you can imagine for somebody who has that in mind about a counselor, do I really want to go sit in front of that person and be analyzed, so to speak? So I think that plays a role, but I think too, kind of society at large, you talk about just being shy. Like, I think we live with this sense that this is just who I am. This is just me. This is how life is. I'm more reserved. I'm shy, whatever it might be. And so we don't view it as a problem. We view it kind of as, this is my personality. So I'll just...
I can't change it, ultimately.
Yeah, and I'll just continue forging ahead, and I just apparently will always be uncomfortable in social situations. So...
Well, you've definitely proven that wrong. Like now being able to speak on a podcast in front of like large groups of people.
Yeah. And it's been a journey, and I think it always will be. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the cover story for Counseling Today in August is going to be about social anxiety disorder.
Oh, no. That's cool.
Yeah. So one of the people from ACA was at my not at the presentation, but was going through the list of presentations and contacted me and wanted to know if I'd be interviewed for that story, and I was happy to do it.
Famous.
But
he's famous,
now
and
I'm on
he
here,
flew
right?
in everybody.
Sure. But yeah, so it's it's that idea that here's something I struggled with for pretty much all my life, and now it's turned into this kind of a redemptive story where I'm giving back kind of some inspiration and hope is what people describe to me when I do these presentations, podcasts, now various things. So you kind of ask how it's been in my life. It's always been there, and then it took trying to get a Ph.D. to really get to the point where I was like,
you don't have to do that,
I
listeners.
need help with it. Exactly. But it took that for me to realize this really is something more significant than just general discomfort, general shyness, that sort of thing. I had gotten all the data that I had needed to continue forward with my study, which is kind of an obstacle to get by in the first place. And statistics are usually, for a lot of people, the hardest part of a dissertation. And I had a friend who was willing to consult. He's into statistics. He loves it. He does consultation for people as kind of a part-time job. And he was like, I'll do it with you for free. And for some reason, it took me months to take him up on that offer. And the more it was just kind of a procrastination. Mm-hmm. And the more I thought on it and kind of reflected, like, why am I not just moving forward with this? I realized it was that I had a significant fear of him, even as a friend, kind of perceiving me as a fraud. Mm-hmm. He already had a Ph.D. He was a psych professor. And if I take this to him and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing, that shame that I would feel and kind of perceived embarrassment or judgment from him was just keeping me locked in place. And once I had that done, the next step was defending that in front of professors, a group of them. And so it all came to head with just all of that actual kind of audience involvement. And it just got to a point where I was like, I got to do something about this. And that was in 2012 when I received the formal diagnosis. But again, in hindsight, I see it throughout my life, and it's been a process of navigating it ever since.
Yeah, for sure.
So for those listening, how would they know, I guess, that it's quote unquote an issue for them that they would like to resolve?
Mm-hmm. I think it's very much a personal decision. Clinically, we talk about impairment, that, we don't really assign a disorder if there isn't clinically significant impairment. If it's not getting in the way of life, usually it takes getting in the way of life for people to come into our offices. It's something has to be bad enough that they want to go talk to somebody else about it. And I think that's what it's about. It's that idea that there is hope, there is help. And so if you're in a situation where it's like, I can't get past this, I think it's really beneficial to go ahead and at least give it a shot, try it out.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to share a little bit about like my personal experience, and maybe you can share some symptoms of people, because mine looked very different than, like, I don't know what some people's might look like, but I noticed that like for years it was procrastination of like your PhD. That's a big deal. For me, I love to be in social situations, and I'm an extrovert and I talk a lot. So somebody would never think that I had social anxiety, but like in doing that, I would have to like drink or do something to like calm my nerves and, quote unquote, be myself. Yeah. So I don't know, are there any other like symptoms that like we can share to people that might like help them realize if this is something that they're struggling with, or somebody else in their life, or any personal experiences?
Kind of what you described is usually defined as safety behaviors, those things that we do to try to not fully confront a social situation, to drink and be a little bit, that social lubricant that I have to do this before I move forward. So there are safety behaviors like that. In my presentations that I would do and teaching courses and stuff early on, my safety behavior was having a pile of notes before me, because I didn't want to run out of things to talk about. Like, what if I'm teaching a 3-hour class and I get to 2 hours and it's like, I don't have any more material. So for me, it was all about like, and it's obviously want to be prepared, but it's excessive preparation. So kind of the safety behaviors that we do, sometimes unconsciously, that we might start to become more aware of. Other ones are simply not making eye contact. So, you go through the grocery store, you go through your workplace, whatever it might be, and as people come your way, you tend to just kind of look down and avoid. Yeah. And I think that's kind of where I was going then too, is avoidance, I think, is the number one symptom when people recognize that they are just completely disengaging from situations, not even going forth. Anxiety and avoidance are so interconnected.
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's probably important to distinguish between like true introversion, right, versus the avoidance, right? And so maybe it's for people to be honest with themselves and say, hey, would I like to go to, to this party, for example, and not have to be the star of the show, but I want to go there and participate in it so I, can have experiences and stories to tell.
Sure.
Or is it that I really don't want to be around?
Right. Yeah. And, as an introvert myself too, I think, as you describe, you could go to a social function, you might leave early because it wears you out, or whatever it might be. But you're at least putting yourself out there. You're engaging those things that you want to do. Whereas a person who's probably more toward kind of the disorder side of things just completely avoids it altogether, despite perhaps having a desire to go. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess what would be helpful for people, like if they do kind of identify this in their own lives, to kind of work towards, like how does somebody obviously go to a therapist and counselor, but what does that kind of look like perspective wise? And
going to, like I said, going to a therapist, going to a counselor is a great thing, but not all people are ready for that either. I think, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask, and do you find, or I guess first let me start with one question. Have you ever seen clients online?
I haven't.
Okay,
no.
Video, okay. I was just wondering, I've noticed that I do offer online services, and there is a level of comfort with some of my clients that is just, it's easier for them, right? There's like the safety behind the screen. I mean, even though I'm still seeing them, like there's that enough of that distance and separation and quote unquote protection, right? That I find that they're able to be more at ease and more honest and comfortable. And so I was just wondering, like, oh, well, maybe that might be an okay step for those with social anxiety, right? Before actually coming into an office.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think any opportunity to receive help and engage those services is a good thing. Ultimately, it would be awesome if they kind of graduated, so to speak, to a level of doing it face to face. But technology is a bit of a double-edged sword, but it does offer us at least, if that's what they're willing to do, then great, so be it. It's better than nothing.
Right, yeah. But, okay, first good step, and you would say you think the work would to be able to practice really being in the presence of somebody else and working through that fear of judgment of, oh, what's she or he going to think of what I'm saying, and all that.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So some other things, I'm big on, and it's hard to do even personally, but having a kind of growth orientation to life as opposed to I pass or I fail in situations.
Because that's very black or white.
Absolutely.
And if I have that confirmation bias of like negativity, I'm probably always going to fail ultimately.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then why try? If I know it's going to go poorly, it's going to go poorly, at least in my mind, then why bother trying? So if we can think of it more as it being kind of social situations, if we can think of it as an opportunity to learn, kind of put something in my toolbox, so to speak, a skill, and then move forward, that's different than I have to impress this person or this has to go well.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you think of it as pass fail, it is a lot of pressure. So one of the things I mentioned in my presentations is even telling yourself I'm going to score like a 6 out of 10 in this conversation as you know you're about to engage someone, and it's like whatever that 6 looks like to you, it just means you don't have to be perfect. You're allowed to stumble over your words. You're allowed to say something silly because that person probably has in their life too, and it's okay. So really trying to make it, let me take something, learn from it, and try again the next time, as opposed to I just can't do it, so I won't even try.
A little bit of permission, and everything kind of being on a spectrum.
Absolutely.
I love that too, of kind of going in with this mindset shift of, rather than it being externally driven, okay, this internal motivation, hey, I'm going to do something new, and like doing this, like this act of trying something and scoring at a 6 out of 10, that's more important than whatever I think that they think about me, or whatever's, they might say. Right?
Yeah, and in acceptance and commitment therapy, they talk about letting values lead the way as opposed to our feelings. So if I feel anxious and I let that drive me, I'll avoid any time, any situation that makes me anxious, I'll avoid it. But if I kind of dig a little deeper and say, I do value human connection, I value relating with people, and I'm going to let that push me forward into this situation, despite the anxiety coming along, at least I'm moving forward, at least I'm trying, at least I'm doing something. And I mentioned before we were on air that I had, when I got my Ph.D. my son was born 2 weeks after I graduated. And so what moved me forward with those statistics and that data was, I need to have this done before I have a kid, because it's going to get a lot more complicated at that point. So it was kind of that valuing of family and time that was like, it doesn't matter how scary this is, go, move forward, do it. And the anxiety's coming along, but at least you're doing it.
Yeah. I like that. That's powerful.
Yeah. So a lot of, and when anxiety is fueled by avoidance, it's okay approaching it, right, and doing it, but doing it in a safer way, right, kind of stair-stepping, right, kind of exposure therapy of sorts, right? Yeah. I'm curious, do you work with clients about identifying safer people to practice, like being social with?
I think you can do that, absolutely. That, there are some situations where you might create a hierarchy of this, let's say it's a 10. 10 means you would be absolutely terrified to do this, no chance. Well, what's one step before that, one step before that, one step, and work your way down to something that is still challenging, but not so frightening that it just won't get accomplished. So it might be making eye contact with a cashier, in a store, and that might be the goal for that week, is that, can you try this? You don't even have to say hi or, how's your day going or anything like that. Just make eye contact and allow that to be a win.
I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
Why would I want to do that if I feel intense anxiety about that? Putting the values aside, I want to avoid contact.
That's the bad news for people that struggle with anxiety disorders. The gold standard for treatment is doing what makes you anxious, exposure. And so it really becomes, the motivation has to come from, I don't want to keep living the way I'm living. Like if I externalize anxiety and say, here's this thing that's been a part of my life, do I want to let it keep winning? At some point, that has to be enough of a motivator for people to at least try the small steps, even if they're not willing to do something more overwhelming. But it's hard.
Well, and I just say that knowing that, like, I have so many clients, like you're talking about, that those avoidance behaviors, and I try and share with them, like, you have to move through it instead of around it. Just to kind of give a visual.
Absolutely.
And I feel like, sometimes it's really hard to do. And you have to kind of wrap your mind around why I'm doing that. So.
A mental picture that I like to use with that kind of moving forward despite the anxiety is thinking about driving a car and knowing that anxiety is going to be in the passenger seat, but it's finally not driving. It doesn't have the wheel anymore. And so when a situation comes up and I feel myself wanting to avoid it, wanting to get out of it, I have that in mind, that is anxiety switching me spots right now in this car? Is it driving my life now? And then you can even work to, okay, it's in the passenger seat. What do we do to get it in the back seat? What do we get it, out of the car and in the rear view mirror to kind of continue building up? But just that idea that it's going to come along, for a lot of people, how do we not let it control us completely?
I like that visualization, in the sense of, like, being someone who's had anxiety for a long time, that I kind of had this idea of, like, someday it would go away, and it has not gone away. And I know now that it won't fully ever go away. Has it gotten better? Oh my gosh, like 1,000%, it's gotten better. But sometimes it's beside me, sometimes it's behind me, sometimes it's really far away, and have you had that experience as well?
Absolutely. I remember even as a kid thinking, I can't wait till I'm older and have a job and I'm settled in and I know what I'm doing.
Oh, yes.
And then I get here, at this age, I'll be 35 tomorrow, actually. And
happy birthday.
Thanks. I get to this age and it's like, I had no idea back then that it just
still
gets
don't know.
harder.
Maybe once I get a Ph.D. or buy the house, get married.
And it's waiting on those external things. Like, what will I finally accomplish that makes it go away? And you get to the point where it's like, it doesn't. It takes something internal to help manage it and navigate it. And if you can eliminate the excessive anxiety, awesome. Anxiety will always be around. To some extent, though, it's healthy, I mean, it motivates us, but you just, that's been my experience too. You just kind of keep moving forward. It gets better over time, but I don't expect my nerves and stuff like that, the anxiety to ever completely go away.
Yeah, because I would assume like there's a lot of this work is practicing the acceptance, like sitting with the anxiety, which I know if you're a client of mine and you're hearing this, you're like rolling your eyes like, no. But there's one element of this that like will never go away in terms of us being social creatures. There is always going to be this evaluative piece, right? Like that judgment is never going to go away. And there can be some helpful benefits, right? We do need a gauge of when we're completely off base, right?
Sure.
But I'm wondering how you work with clients then to accept that there is, what happens if somebody does judge you poorly?
That kind of tolerance of like sitting with it, I guess.
It's kind of a distress tolerance, like being okay with that. And I don't want it to sound like you just shouldn't ever care about what people think. It's healthy to some extent to want to do your best, to engage people well. But I think to kind of target what you asked, building psychological flexibility to me is a really big part of it, where we can sit with a client and perhaps something didn't go well. Maybe we thought we offended someone, whatever it might be. Let's consider the alternatives. Let's stop thinking about kind of the catastrophe that we think it was and look at alternatives. And I'll give you an example. When I first started doing professional presentations, if someone left that presentation in the middle of it, I instantly started just being overwhelmed by that. Like, okay, what am I doing wrong that made them want to leave?
Yeah. But they could have been like me and have a small bladder and needed to go to the bathroom.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And so that's part of this is, what are some other possibilities for why that person might have left? Maybe they got a phone call, maybe they needed a wide variety of things. It doesn't mean my presentation's terrible. It could, and like we can talk about that too. Maybe it is terrible. Maybe I'm doing poorly and need to improve, but there are a wide variety of other options too. And so helping people kind of nail down those situations specifically that are causing a lot of distress, looking at worst case scenario, you did offend that person. What do we do now? They thought you were boring. What do we do now? But maybe that isn't the case. Maybe, and then you can start to explore what are alternatives for that.
I like that in the sense of saying like, maybe you were boring. Like, what now? And it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's not that bad whenever I actually think about it. But in my head, like thinking about that person being boring or me being boring just feels, I can't tolerate that.
Right.
I can't handle it.
Right.
Ultimately.
Which makes it worse then because, if you think about being up in front of a group of people, whether it's a presentation like I do or a business meeting or whatever it might be, if I all of a sudden start worrying about how am I doing, what are they thinking, why did that person leave, I'm no longer focusing my cognitive resources on the material I'm presenting, my style, anything like that. It's all overtaken by what if they don't like this, and so our performance does decline.
Yeah.
And then we have more proof that we're not cut out for it, kind of thing. So it's trying to be in the moment, and if you need to think about it afterwards and try and evaluate what was going on, so be it, but doing the best you can to stay in the moment and not get lost in all of that evaluation.
Yeah, and I think I know a practical tool that I liked even to use for myself. I know I want people's approval. Like I've actually worked through having excessive need for approval from others. And so then, I'm in my head about, am I smart? What do they think? Am I engaging? Et cetera, et cetera. And to shift from the performance to, actually, what am I learning from them? Like, can I hear what they're saying, right? And so it's not even about me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And just like, okay, I'm having a conversation with them. Let me focus on them.
Yeah. I think that's talked about actually by one of the people interviewed for that article I mentioned, where they describe trying to go into things with a curiosity. So instead of being focused on oneself, go in with a curiosity about other people and about the situation and that sort of thing.
It's made a world difference in dating life for me, I'll just say.
Yeah, sure.
I actually wanted to, I bring that up though, to segue at some point into talking about social anxiety in relationships and what that looks like and maybe your story with that too.
Sure, yeah. I think that, well, one thing I was going to say before that, losing my train of thought.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
It happens all the time in here.
when we aren't as other focused, like you think about meeting someone new, and I don't know if you've done it, I'm sure people in the audience have, but you meet someone, you shake your hand, you exchange names, and 3 seconds later you have no idea what their name is. And it's like, for me, that's always been about being so anxious about, is my hand sweaty as I shake their hand, is what are they thinking, sort of thing, that I don't even know their name after they tell it to me. And so that became kind of one of those steps of things to work on, was when I meet someone, hear their name, maybe even repeat it back. Nice to meet you, so and so. And so that was kind of a goal of mine, was I want to actually know people's names when they introduce themselves to me.
It's like very like cognitive and behavioral, and like gives you something to like work towards. I just want to share one experience that I had, or like my whole time in grad school, right? You're giving like presentations and talking in front of groups. I met Julianne in a group. She didn't think I liked her. And it was probably because I had social anxiety.
Also, I'm like rejection sensitive. So
so we're just
combination of
feeding
both.
off of each other. But I all throughout grad school, I had this idea in my head that I was like dumb or stupid. And like looking back now, I can see it was like this cognitive fog, because I was like very anxious and like a little overwhelmed. But I remember going to my roommate and being like, I think I'm dumb. Like I don't, and I'm in grad school.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Like,
all of the evidence suggests otherwise.
But just kind of, like not really always being there. And my boss, Melanie Wells, with Lifeology, my old boss, she used to say that curiosity begets compassion. And I think kind of what y'all are both talking about is this curiosity like begets connection in some way of like what's going on with this other person, but also like curiosity about yourself of like what is going on with me? What am I feeling? What's happening? And I can be more compassionate to myself rather than critical.
Exactly.
Ultimately.
Yeah.
So,
One thing that I love to talk to students, clients, whoever about is I ask them, and I think I did this in the presentation, I ask them to think about the person they love most in the world. For a lot of people, it's their kids, it's a spouse, a significant other, whatever it might be. And I joke, if you have 2 kids, pick your favorite, whatever.
Or a pet, is that?
Yeah, there you go.
How about a favorite plant?
There you go. But to think about kind of reflecting curiosity on oneself, what if I talked to that person the way I talk to myself? And if I think of my son, I think of my daughter, if I talk to them the way that I critically talk to myself at times, they wouldn't develop in a healthy way at all. So why not give myself permission to have self-compassion, to cut myself some slack, to allow it to be okay when things don't go quite the way I wish they had, and keeping in mind as I evaluate my self-talk, what if I was saying this to my son? Sort of thing.
It's like powerful. It almost like makes you want to tear up a little bit.
Yeah,
like I would never say that,
right?
To the person I love.
I think that's what a lot of people find out, and so another thing for them to kind of keep in mind as they move forward: talk to yourself like you talk to somebody you love. And hopefully, eventually, you do develop that love for yourself.
Yeah, I think that it would make it a lot easier to be in social situations if not only I'm having the judgment of other people, but having the judgment of myself, being able to let that go. At least. Yeah.
If I think poorly of myself, why would I expect anybody else to think highly of me? If I am down on me, it just naturally follows that I would expect other people to be down on me as well. So I think it does really start, even though it's a very relational issue and a very external issue, it really starts inward with some of that work inside.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, going back to your question, Julian, about social anxiety with dating. I had this one client, oh my gosh, loved him so much. But he would notice like somebody getting up in an audience, but like even so sensitive. And I do this too, of like somebody's eye contact, like he was on a date with somebody or talking to somebody out, like when their eye contact would drift, he would notice like, oh man, they don't like me, you know. So yeah, what is your experience with, like, maybe you can share a little bit about meeting your wife or what that's been like. We've been through the dating game and it is a rough.
I hear it just keeps getting harder and harder and worse and worse. But
well, yeah, I can tell you more about that if you want later. It's okay. Also, I'm very much learning.
Yeah.
Positive mentality.
Yeah, exactly. You know, part of social anxiety is a pretty significant fear of rejection. So that makes initiating any kind of relationship really difficult. That you, in my case too, I had to be guaranteed that person liked me before I would even consider saying, hey, let's go out, sort of thing. I was friends with my wife for several years before we ever started dating. And I think that's a great thing. But, you know, tracing back through my life, there was always a fear of engaging the opposite sex, just that sense that what if they reject me, how terrible and embarrassing that would be. And so, again, avoid it, you know, don't even try, sort of thing. So you know, somebody with social anxiety disorder may just never even marry, never date, never have that opportunity, never give it a try, just because of that fear of rejection. If they are in relationships, I think, you know, it can really get in the way then too.
Yeah, I want to. I'm like keep sharing my personal experience
fine.
because you're like you know, I get what you're saying, Brad. But like with my partner, I find sometimes like I want him to hold my hand or to touch me. Like it's too vulnerable for me to like reach out. Like there's this sense of, and of course he's not going to reject me, you know.
Sure.
But like the sense of waiting.
Yeah.
For him to like love me, to approve of me.
Right. Yeah.
And so I've really had to like kind of go out of my comfort zone and like touch him or say I love you before he does.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it can put a big strain on a relationship if one person is always uncertain they're being approved of. You know, if they're always seeking that approval from a significant other, that's going to put a strain on a relationship. And I think about too, like, I hate talking on the phone, and that to me, I trace that back, and my parents will probably watch this because I told them I was doing it, but
yes,
they will.
We love parents that support.
Yeah. So
shout out Becky and John.
There was a time, I have no idea how old I was, but when I was going to order a pizza, and I was fighting with them about, no, you do it, and finally my mom was like, oh, do we need to write it down for you? And I was like, yeah, write down the order and I'll read it over the phone, because I was already had some of that anxiety, but that became a thing. It was like anytime I was ever going to talk on the phone, it was, do we need to write that down for you? And, you know, it became something that they poked fun at me for. And it's funny in hindsight, but at the time, you know, it's one of those things that you hang on to. And to this day, I hate talking on the phone. And I don't know if it's, you know, there's some connection there, I'm sure. But back to relationships, I'll tell my wife a lot of times, like, hey, can you order for us, whatever it is? Can you call? And it's like, no, I have the ability to do that. Like, pick up the phone and call somebody. But if somebody really significantly struggles with social anxiety, all of the responsibility can be placed on a significant other. And again, that's oftentimes going to cause some sort of strain.
Yeah, I can see how that could build resentment.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And just kind of like a power differential that's
Absolutely.
not healthy.
It's not balanced.
Yeah.
So, okay. So I'm on a date right now. Okay. And like, I'm experiencing like that, like fear of judgment, evaluation. I don't know. I guess I'm thinking like, or even like being on the dating apps and like starting the process, like talking on the phone, like being on dates, like all the things that go into that. There is like so much evaluation that I'm doing on this other person of like, are you a good fit for me? And then anticipating they're thinking the same thing. What do we do?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let me know when you figure it out. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So. No, but I think, there, in that instance, there has to be some level of understanding that there is evaluation from both parties. I am evaluating
that's true.
this person.
To a certain level, we can't just say like, oh, that evaluation's not there.
Right. Yeah, there is evaluation. And if I'm doing it, if I'm evaluating them to an extent, I have to allow them to do it as well. Where I think it can hurt is if they decide, hey, I want to cut this off. I don't think I want to pursue this relationship. All of a sudden I've been negatively evaluated. What's wrong with me? What did I do? That sort of thing. And if you kind of turn those tables, or if you talk to a friend who cut off a relationship, it's not always because that other person was just so terrible. There are oftentimes other circumstances. And if it's just not a good fit, okay. Do you want to forge ahead in a relationship that's not a good fit? Probably not. So it comes back to some level of acceptance, I think. Being okay.
Acceptance without the personalization, right? Yeah, that sometimes it really just, it's not going to work, right? Yeah. And as you were speaking, I wonder if you see this with clients. I'm speaking from personal experience. I know I've very much approached interactions where I've placed more power in the other person, right? Versus, going into a dating aspect saying, well, I'm actually interviewing them. Do I even like them, right? Yeah. Versus just waiting on them to like me. And so I know that that's been a game changer in the way that I date, and working with clients is kind of shifting that mindset from placing the other person in a position of power to looking at your own power in the situation, as well as the acceptance of if it's not working out, then it won't work out.
Yeah, that tendency to just kind of put them on a pedestal before anything's even happened.
Yeah, that I'm like less than for some reason. Yeah, going back to those core beliefs.
Exactly.
I'm not lovable, or
right.
whatever it is. Are there any other things that you feel like would be helpful from your presentations or counseling today that we haven't talked about yet?
It's a good question. This is where I should
There's probably so much.
Notes.
We're gonna expose you to.
I think one of the things that I learned to do was to really become, I was already observant, like just by the nature of being timid and anxious in social situations. I totally just observe and watch and kind of pick up all the cues and stuff, but to observe in a different way, where it's like we believe there are haves and have-nots socially, those people that just connect with everyone, and I'm not that, so I'll avoid that kind of stuff, but realizing it's kind of on a continuum. And what I learned was, as I observed other people, my advisor at Ohio University, where I got my Ph.D., Tom Davis, is kind of an icon in Ohio counseling and does work with KCREP and all of this. And I couldn't probably think of anyone more highly than I do him. And when I present with him, what do you know? Some people get up and leave for whatever reason. And so that just tells me, if people are leaving that presentation by one of the most respected people in the field in our state, maybe it's not because it's terrible. Maybe, and if it is, maybe he isn't perfect all of the time. And so I think trying to observe and recognize that we are all on a continuum. We are all on a spectrum of social skills. Even those that have great social skills will describe, putting their foot in their mouths, where it's like, oh yeah, I messed up. So
many times.
So it's trying to kind of get rid of that black and white thinking and just kind of watch those people that you deem so socially adept and see if they are really as perfect all the time as you think they are. And if you find out, no, they're really good socially, what are they doing that you could learn from? What could you pick up? So
there is this point of like maybe some people like actually lacking social skills.
Absolutely.
And it's a skill that you can learn, and like you don't just like not have that and you're doomed forever.
Right.
But I can learn to make eye contact or I don't know, to have a conversation, those types of things too.
Yeah, the social skills is an interesting thing because, again, at presentations, I'll ask people, who played a sport in high school, who played an instrument, who was in theater, and I try to rattle off enough things that basically everyone raises their hand. And I say, if you practice 2 days a week and everybody else practiced 5, how good would you be? And, instantly the thought is I wouldn't be, unless I just had some natural ability that was so far beyond everyone else. Without practicing, I wouldn't be good. And so I asked them to, extrapolate that to social situations. If I've spent my life avoiding them, I haven't practiced. I haven't built up those skills. And so I think that's something we can work with clients on too, is just maintaining eye contact.
Yeah.
Even picking up some of the cliche phrases that we throw at each other in,
Ooh, that's
in the
a good
stores, that
one.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like almost have in mind, what can I say to a person?
Yeah. Where are some talking points? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Julian laughs at me because I Google everything, and I've totally Googled like how to have a conversation with somebody or how to, do certain things that like are kind of like known things how to do.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I want to know the process.
Exactly.
But knowledge is
everything.
power, for sure.
Yeah.
Right? And I also like this aspect that you touched on, and obviously not being perfect at this, acknowledging that you don't have to change who you are. And then two, what I really appreciate, especially about all of us being able to share our own personal stories, is knowing that it's human. That
Exactly.
even I am adept socially, and yes, I get insecure and anxious at times.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong, like that's just part of being and living.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And I think part of that is, if anxiety does win when you're trying to, make these changes in your life, okay, because I think that can be a pitfall for clients, is that I should be doing this better. I'm supposed to do this. And you know what? Anxiety just totally kicked my butt right there. Okay, try again the next time. And just accept that.
Yeah.
It is what it is kind of mentality.
Yeah. I like that idea of like practice. I always tell Julianne, like before she goes on a date or my clients, I'm like, it's practice, you know?
And you get better at it, and I think it really builds the confidence.
Yeah.
I see a big part of working through social anxiety is like building that inner strength, right?
Yeah. You had a guest on. Like I said before the show, I was watching some of your previous ones.
I'm trying to prep a
get
little
up to
bit.
speed.
Those are your notes.
Yeah, that excessive preparation comes with social anxiety. But one was on captivating confidence or something like that, I think. And there were a lot of talking points in there where it was like, yes, this so much applies to building up oneself, to then engage other people more effectively.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, this was so great. I feel like we could keep talking, but I know this is going to be so helpful and powerful for so many people.
I hope so.
Even just maybe connecting with, like, maybe this is something that, again, it's on a spectrum that they struggle with. But I appreciate your vulnerability ultimately of sharing your experience and then your knowledge from being in our field as well. So.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming from Ohio.
You're welcome. No, it was fun. I'm glad I did.
Same.
Should we ask if there are any particular resources or books or podcasts other than ours?
One book that I really like, and it's not so clinical, is Thriving with Social Anxiety by Hattie Cooper. I don't remember her entire story, but I think she was like a journalist who dealt with social anxiety and kind of then dug into it and wrote a book about it. But it's so much of what I get into are really clinical in nature, journals, things like that. But that's a book that is meant for just the everyday person, from having clinical tidbits to connecting on a more kind of down-to-earth way. I think that's one book I would really recommend to people who kind of struggle.
Just even that title, yes, you can thrive.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah, and I think that's, I don't know if we're going long, sorry, but that's part of why I am vulnerable about my experiences, that, I'm doing pretty well in life. I in every kind of aspect you could look at, I'm doing all right. But I still have dealt with this, and I still deal with this. And so when I share with students, clients, audience members, whoever, that here are my struggles and I'm still thriving, I think they kind of connect to that like, oh, he doesn't have it all together to achieve all that. Maybe I could too, sort of thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You're human, and
and we think you're doing more than okay.
Yeah, for sure.
In our opinion.
Yeah, things are going pretty well.
If you need that,
that
you validation.
Might not need that.
I'm human. I like it.
Yeah. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
For
I
sharing.
appreciate the invite. It was fun.
Yeah, cool. All right, we'll see y'all later. Thank you so much for listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes and share with your friends. It really helps us reach more people.
We might only record once a week, but we're with you every day.